This is the Wild Ohio Podcast, where conservation meets conversation.
And Ohio's wildlife takes center stage. Join us as we discuss
wildlife conservation and outdoor recreation in the Buckeye State.
Welcome to the Wild Ohio Podcast. I'm Abby Rodebeck with my co-hosts,
John Kaufman,
Jordan Phillips.
And today we are with Matt Shumar of Ohio State University. He is with the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative. Welcome.
Thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, what you do, how you got to the Ohio State, Ohio State?
Yeah, the Ohio State. Sure. So the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative is a network of organizations throughout Ohio and regionally working together on bird conservation. So there are around 120 or so organizations in the network. That's everything from the Division of Wildlife to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, universities, metro parks, nature centers. Basically any organization that has any interest in bird conservation becomes a part of that network. It's really just a voluntary network to try to get people to collaborate together in sort of more unified forces. So that organization brought me here. So I came in 2009 to OSU, not for this project, but I was hired to coordinate the state's second breeding bird atlas, which was a large citizen science project to document all the birds across the state of Ohio that were nesting here. When that finished up, the previous coordinator had left to take another job elsewhere, and this was sort of a perfect transition into the sort of networks that I had built up over the state during that project, and it's been great. So I've been doing this since 2016.
Okay, so the program's been around since about 2016?
The Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative? Actually, it was founded in 2004.
Oh, wow.
So it was an agreement between the Division of Wildlife and the Ohio State University at the time to develop what had been sort of taking off nationally. Partners in Flight, which is a similar type of organization that you may have heard of. They work across the Western Hemisphere for bird conservation, but sort of the same concept. So a network of organizations sort of collaboratively working on bird conservation issues. They formed in the 1990s, and there was an effort to develop sort of statewide programs, and some of these statewide bird conservation initiatives formed out of that effort.
Yeah, and you talk about the atlas. I know that you've done a lot of work with that. So that's breaking down those breeding populations, but it's also got to be regionally, just within the state, I would imagine, where you're focusing on eastern meadowlark or bobolink. Like you're getting very specific to those niches of where those birds are found.
Yeah, the Atlas was a very intensive 6-year fieldwork project to really understand for every square inch of the state, essentially, where each of these species were occurring to get a better understanding of, one, baseline distributions, but also that was the second time the Atlas had been done in Ohio. So the first one was in the mid-1980s by Bruce Peterjohn and Dan Rice here. And so we were able to actually look at more than 2 decades of change in breeding bird distributions and populations.
Wow, update the science and everything that goes with
And that was a hugely citizen science program. You're working with just folks all over the state of Ohio. I guess that gets into me for how many birders do you think you have actively involved in your organization? Like how big is that?
Birders, well, birding has really just blown up in the last few years. I mean, we've really seen that, I would say, in the last 5 years take off, especially since sort of post-pandemic. You know, a lot of people were home and got outside during that period. Bird watching is really one of the largest, if not the largest, outdoor activity in the United States. Millions of people are bird watchers. And for any of these projects, we had about 1,000 volunteer data submitters during the second Atlas.
That's awesome.
That's just grown and grown since then. So things like the Biggest Week in American Birding and all of these other festivals that bring a lot more awareness to sort of bird watching has really blown up in the last several years. We're actually working on the third bird atlas with folks here at the Division of Wildlife.
Okay. Excellent.
And so we'll be starting field work for that next year, actually, and we anticipate thousands of people volunteering for that. Pennsylvania started their third atlas right now. They're in the process of it, and I think they have around 4,000 volunteers in that effort right now.
So we hope to have more than that.
Yes,
then, right?
Obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's how it goes. Well, that's awesome. So is the Atlas part of the Ohio Bird Initiative now?
It kind of goes alongside it. So
Okay.
there's definitely some strong overlap. The Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative has always had a really strong community science program or part of that. We help to coordinate the Ohio crane count with folks
Okay.
here at the division. So that's been a strong effort as well. So they kind of go hand in hand. Because it's so big, it will be kind of its own separate project. But
I
a lot of
imagine.
what we do will be integrated into OBCI for sure.
Okay. So what are the other projects that you work on?
Yeah, so we've done a lot over the years. We have a few focal areas. Forest management is one of those. So we work with both professional foresters and private landowners on resources to manage their woodlands sustainably for resident and migratory birds. So that's been something that we've been working on for really since the start of OBCI. But we also coordinate the Ohio Lights Out program,
Yes.
which is an effort to reduce the hazards to migratory birds during the spring and fall migration.
And that's going to be kind of our big focus this
Yeah,
time
I'd
around,
love to
right?
get into
The
that.
Lights Out
Before we jump
initiative.
into that, I do have one
Yeah.
question. You talk about working with private landowners and forestry management. So are those private landowners coming to you all with a desire for certain species, and then you are tailoring that management work for that? Or is it just kind of a focus on early successional, mid-successional, late successional, and what you know the bird species in that area could benefit from?
It's a hybrid of both. So we
Okay.
provide a lot of information for private landowners because everyone's goal, their management goal, is going to be unique. But we see a lot of themes, and so we've developed resources over the years. We have a few publications that summarize resources. So talking to private lands biologists, working with both the Division of Wildlife and Forestry and the private lands biologists, foresters, soil and water conservation districts, and we bring all those folks together in our network to talk with landowners and sort of connect those pieces together so that they understand the things that they can do for different bird communities, so different successional guilds, depending on how those overlap with their own interests. They might have a strong interest in bobwhite or pheasants and, linking them with programs to create a mixture of, successional habitats so that they can support those bird communities.
And then where would you find more information on that programming? Is that through NRCS and National Conservation Resource Service?
Yes.
Thank you. We love acronyms, and it's
Yeah.
hard to keep
Very
up.
much.
Yes,
It's
we
hard to
do.
keep track.
And some of the programming that they offer, is that
Yeah.
a good starting point
It
for
is.
someone?
And so we've indexed a lot of that on the OBCI website, which is obcinet.org. And so all of our publications and resources are available there, but within those, we often connect people directly to the NRCS offices, whatever the local district of the Division of Wildlife is, so that they can connect with the private lands biologists there as well.
Perfect. Good info.
We're all connected.
Yep. So now,
Lights out.
Lights out.
Yeah.
Lights
Let's
out.
talk about
We're
it.
getting into migration.
Yeah, exciting.
Lights Out is an initiative to help the birds as they migrate. Tell us more.
Yeah. So for those of you that are birds or interested in birds, you know that they travel really long distances. And there's been this increased push for full annual cycle ecology and conservation. So for decades, we as biologists have spent so much time and energy on creating really high quality breeding habitats. And we've done a great job of that, but we still see these population declines. And a lot of that is driven by non-breeding periods. And so, we've started to work in the tropics, so in Central and South America, to understand, do these birds have the habitats that they need there? And in some cases, yes, some cases, no. But it turns out that migration is really the pinch point for a lot of these species because they're traveling thousands of miles twice a year. That's when they're encountering a lot of these hazards. In research at stations like Hubbard Brook in the New England area that have been studying black-throated blue warbler populations for decades now, they've shown that mortality during migration is actually 15 times higher than any other period.
Really?
So
Oh, wow.
if we're really passionate or interested in conserving these migratory bird populations, we really have to understand those hazards and resources during the migratory period.
So
And-
with that,
yeah.
jump in the 15% high in the mortality rates, right? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I had lost. They attribute that mostly to what?
there are lots of things going on there. So one is just available resources. Being able to make this long migratory journey, birds need a lot of high quality food to put on fat reserves. And so we need high quality forests throughout that. As we develop the landscape more and more and industrialize agriculture, things become isolated. And so birds are just not able to keep that refueling process as efficiently. But the other part is hazards. And so that's kind of where Lights Out comes in, sort of working in more urbanized landscape to sort of reduce the hazards that creates bird building collisions.
So I got to ask, let's start and talk to me at a different level here.
Yeah.
I see birds when the sun is up.
Yeah.
So turning lights out, wouldn't the birds be asleep? What part of the migration am I missing here on why my lights being on in my house are going to affect a bird that is sleeping in a tree?
Yeah, that's the actual migration part is the part that you're missing. So birds sleep little during migration. Most of the songbirds that we get really excited about, tanagers, thrushes, the warblers, all this colorful burst of birds that are coming from South America during the spring, they're almost all nocturnal migrants. And so when we see them during the day, they're foraging sort of ravenously. They're basically like building up fat during that time, because when the sun sets, they're taking off they're taking off into the night sky, and they're flying all night long to their next location.
Okay. All right.
I just don't think lots of people have any. We talk a lot about waterfowl migration and these songbirds. People just don't realize that
there's so much going on overhead.
That happens at night while we're sleeping.
So how does the light impact that?
Yeah, so we know a little bit about how birds migrate, the ways in which they navigate. Magnetic cues are part of that, but also light, we're learning, is a huge part of how birds navigate across the landscape. And so they have this sort of natural attraction to light. Think about insects that are flying to your moths at your porch light at night. It's the same sort of mechanism really for birds. They see light, and assumingly there's some sort of polar attraction to that, but they're using that and they're attracted to it. So large areas of artificial light on the landscape can draw birds to unnaturally high proportions. And there's been research showing, using both radar data and data coming in from eBird, showing that these nocturnal migrants are moving away from high quality forested areas into inner city areas simply because of the lights. And when they're there, they're waking up the next morning, or when the light comes up and they're starting to forage, that's when all the hazards are there, sort of reflective glass, reflecting all the green space around. And so they're sort of concentrated in areas that have higher hazards.
So it all makes sense. You guys are obviously doing the research on the ground, and some of the results are showing that, this mortality is higher during that migration. But is there anything, a citizen science component, how do we know this is actually working? How is this evaluated?
Yeah, so we have a number of community science programs in our cities across Ohio, where we have volunteers that are walking around downtown areas on standardized survey routes every morning during migration to document birds that are injured or dead. So the injured birds go to a local wildlife rehabber. So here in Columbus, they go to the Ohio Wildlife Center. Cleveland, they go to Lake Erie Nature and Science Center. Dead birds get processed and go into the museum. So here, we're taking them to the OSU Museum of Biological Diversity. We do that every day as long as it's safe to get outside. So rain or shine, like the postman, to get out there to see, what's happening, to get a better understanding of the climatic conditions, the weather conditions that sort of time series might contribute to more bird collisions, what types of landscape and design factors. And so different building facades, the landscape design around it, how those two things interact, so that when we do find areas that are contributing to a lot of bird collisions, we can work with those building administrators to make small, sometimes, modifications to make them safer for birds. And sometimes it's turning out lights. Sometimes it might be putting up a film on the glass to make it less reflective, changing the way the vegetation interacts, whatever we can do there.
So I know like local Audubon chapters will have volunteer groups that go out. Is that a place where people would go to find out if they could participate?
Yeah, again, we have this information on our website.
Oh, okay.
obcinet.org.
So the website for the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative would be like the hub for it.
Yeah, and that'll direct us. We also have a Lights Out, but we can
Yeah.
link directly there. And
Yeah.
the volunteer management varies city by city. So here in
Yeah.
Columbus, the Grange Insurance Audubon Center sort of manages the volunteers. In Cleveland, it's Cleveland Metro Parks. They're
Gotcha.
helping out with that. So again, whatever that local partner is, we sort of work with our network of organizations to figure out who can best bring those resources to the table.
So you talk about this 2004, I believe you said was. So obviously there's a lot of science, data, and research going into this. But I would be very curious as we're approaching year 22 of this. What are some of the highlights of the results that we are seeing from some of our participating, cities, towns, villages, however you're going about doing that? I'm not really sure if you're knocking individually on a door or you're going block to block, but what are some of the highlights that you've seen in your time in being involved with this?
Yeah, so Ohio Lights Out is a program that we started kind of, I guess, halfway between the start of OBCI and today. So the first program launched in Columbus in 2012. We did a small pilot study at that time using OSU students to survey some areas. And a few years later, we started more sort of broad-scale effort with volunteers, so a citizen science component for that in Cleveland and Columbus, so really since about 2017. It's been fascinating, some of the insights that we've learned. I mean, we kind of know this field of science has been really exploding in the last few years because we know it's a big problem. And so the science is there. We know when you put glass next to vegetation, you're going to have problems, especially in really brightly lit areas. And so that combination is just a cocktail. And so we can make recommendations without that. For the business community, they sometimes want to see local data to influence them to make those changes, and I understand that. So the data don't necessarily sort of tell us more about that, but we have learned some pretty fascinating things about just the ecology of birds through this. Which birds are migrating through particular areas, for instance.
Oh, that'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I mean, Connecticut warbler, for example. Have you all seen a Connecticut warbler?
Can't say
Not
that I
in the
have.
flesh.
This is a bird that birders just drool over. Like it's a uncommon bird. They're extremely cryptic. They don't nest here in Ohio. They're boreal birds, so your chance of seeing one are pretty slim. And when people hear about a Connecticut warbler, they get really excited.
They're chasing.
They
Chasing.
flock to it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to make a pun.
boy.
Sorry, my
Dun,
apologies. Carry on, man. Carry on.
Yeah. In the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, in their collections, they only had like 5 or 6 individuals in the collection before we started Lights Out Cleveland. We now have over 50 individuals that were just collected in downtown Cleveland over the past few years. And
So we know they come through.
we know they're coming through. They're so cryptic that other survey methods don't really detect them. They don't sing much during migration. They're kind of nondescript. They look a lot like
they don't want you to know.
they don't want you to know. But we know that they're using this landscape. And so this has given some good insight into the species that are occurring here, maybe sometimes at different proportions, and some of those trends as well in terms of the species that are more likely to hit buildings.
I saw on the website that there's a lot of businesses and organizations in the different cities that have adopted some bird-friendly architecture.
Yeah, it is gaining traction now. It is, of course, much easier to integrate into new construction because it's a one-and-done deal. There are more products that are now available commercially to put it in, and so there is going to be a small upcharge in that. But again, it's permanent and it's in there. For retrofitting, so just treating glass that already exists on the landscape, it's something that might need to be done every 10 years, and it's costly. And so I can understand that a lot of people are hesitant to do it. But some people have really embraced it. Like I'll say Rocket Arena, so the stadium for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're a big partner in this. Last year, they treated the entire north facade of the building, and that was an over $900,000 project because of our Lights Out effort.
Yeah, so are there organizations or buildings that you've worked with where you only really need one section of the building? Like you don't need to retrofit a whole building.
Yeah, and that's where this volunteer effort has really sort of paid off and given us really good information, because for some buildings, it could look like a monstrosity, like it's all glass. I mean, that is the trend with modern architecture, really. It's glass curtain facade. And so it can be incredibly expensive, hundreds of thousands, if not into the millions of dollars, to treat a particular building. And if it's something that has to be done every 10 years, I can see why some people might have pause into doing it. But with these volunteer collision surveys, we've been able to identify very specific areas that are, we find the most number of collisions.
So you can target.
Yeah, so we can say, like, look.
Where those window strikes are occurring.
Yeah, if you could do anything, if you could just treat this
like
window
just
right here.
Really?
Yeah.
You can narrow it down to that level.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I imagine you get more buy-in from companies that way who don't have to do the whole structure.
Our volunteers are writing down specifically like where they're finding every individual birds, and so now we have a database of years of data of like all around these buildings.
Well, and again, 2017, like just to have that information by now may not seem like much to some people listening to this, but that's a huge piece of information right there.
It's only a few years, but we have over 25,000 salvage birds in that data set, from largely coming from Cleveland and some from Columbus as well.
Wow.
That's a big number. 25,000 salvaged birds in that time period.
And 3/4 of that is coming from Cleveland. Because they are
the lake.
They're right on the lake, so it's a major migratory barrier. So birds are forced to stop over there, and because it's a bright city and it has a beautiful downtown, lots of green space intermixed with more and more
the Rock and Roll
glass.
Hall of Fame up there.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, people will call their county officer if you've heard it, you've seen it, a bird strikes the window, it's dead in the bushes. They call, what do I do about it? But they don't probably have any idea on the volume that's occurring.
And actually the majority of bird collisions happen in residential areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Again, it's because of the green space adjacent to glass. We all have glass on our homes, but we all have trees and bushes and things. And especially as we encourage people to have more native friendly yards, if we're not treating the glass with that, we're in some ways creating ecological traps.
Well, so I guess that's a perfect segue.
Absolutely.
Right.
All right. I'm in Licking County. And I can tell you that if I have a down Saturday or Sunday, it is not unusual to hear a bird strike on my window. So film, we've discussed film, but I also know that we need habitat, backyard habitat. We're big on backyard habitat for all things.
Absolutely.
And I can only imagine you're a wealth of information. So I'll just tee that up and let you go.
Yeah. So it's funny because if I go back to Rocket Mortgage for a moment, so when we met with the administrators there, right outside that glass cube is just a street full of trees. And when we explained to them, it's this reflection of green space that's creating the problem. And one of the administrators asks just naively, like, should we just get rid of these trees? And I'm like, well, that's kind of cutting off the nose, despite the face
one way of doing it.
Yeah. I'm like, or hear me out. We could leave the habitat and treat the glass.
How about?
Yeah. And so the same thing happens in our homes too. Like, we don't want to not be putting out really high quality data, because research has shown that we need more and more native biomass in our backyards.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it has to come with, we need to make sure, like, what does that interaction look like? Like, how does our development sort of interface?
Proper stewardship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What other things can people do aside from treating glass? So like you said, everyone's got shrubs, everyone's got plants. Should they move plants away from windows? Maybe have them, instead of in front of a window, in front of a blank space on the outer wall? Or
some of that for sure. So I know we love to have, because we like our house plants as well, right in front of the window, which is sure, it's great. But if that's your feeder window, maybe don't have your house plants in front of the feeder window.
Okay.
And so sort of break up that connection. But a lot of people will say, well, if you move the feeders a certain distance away, that will reduce. But if you have vegetation next to glass, you're always going to have reflections, which means you're always going to have collisions. And so if you don't want to do anything permanent, like put a film that puts dots on your windows, you can create they're called bird savers, Acopian bird savers, but it's just paracord hung every few inches, so about every 4 inches, just thin black string. And that small movement of the cord in front of the window is enough for them
That's
to see,
just enough
to
for
break
them
up.
to
Really?
steer away from.
So that's a really low-cost solution, and it's actually been proven to be one of the most effective solutions.
And to go into the film a little bit more, I'm familiar with the film, but maybe describe a little bit of that, because you talked about the little dots.
Yeah.
I've seen the film in cutouts of bird species.
Yeah.
I've seen it in little dots, little prisms, but basically it's a distortion of the light coming in and giving that depth to what the window, how the bird is perceiving the window, correct?
Right. So they're perceiving it as habitat because it looks like all of the things that are being reflected in it, and they don't know what glass is.
Yeah.
Right.
And so really, it doesn't matter what you put on the glass. It's the density that's more important.
Okay.
So you don't really, the current recommendation is 2 by 2 inches. So you don't want to have gaps larger than a couple inch. So just a tiny little dot every couple inch is enough to break up that surface,
Really?
and birds see it as a surface as opposed to what looks like an extension of the habitat. So it can be dots, it can be stripes, it can be bird silhouettes, it can be leaves. You can have your 6-year-old out there with a tempera paint marker going to town on it. It can be anything, just as long as you're creating.
Washable paint. You're just trying to break up. The
just
goal
breaking
is
up
to
that
break
solution.
it up.
Yeah.
But
That
but
makes
still
sense.
offering a good way for you to view that backyard that
Right.
you are
Absolutely.
working
And so
on.
that's where the
It's-
tiny little
it's-
dots are the best of both
Yeah.
worlds for that. So the density is enough to break up and show that there's a surface there, but you can still see through it. I mean, I have the dots on my windows at home, and a beautiful bird feeding station outside, and I can still set my camera up, and it doesn't even interfere with
Where
that.
do- where
After
would
a
one-
week, you don't see the dots anymore.
I would say you're looking through
Yeah.
them. Yeah, you
Right.
look right
Yeah.
past them.
Yeah.
Where would one purchase?
So there are lots of different companies, and I don't necessarily need to
Right.
promote one specific
But it's
company.
not hard to find.
It's not hard.
them.
We have that indexed on our website
Okay.
again.
Oh,
So
great.
lots of options. And we usually, when we do outreach events, we'll bring lots of options so people can see like what's available, what might they like for their
Yeah.
home, and costs. For the most part, their residential solutions are all really low cost for the most part.
Does
Can
it?
you-
Oh, go ahead. Abby.
Oh, can you talk a little bit about? We talked about lights out for like tall buildings and stuff. Can you talk about the lighting situation for neighborhoods?
Yeah. Lighting's been interesting. I'm sure you've all noticed it as well, since the types of lighting that we're utilizing has
Yep.
changed. There's a trend towards LED, which is great because it uses less energy.
Very
it's
bright.
cheaper, but it tends to be very bright. It's really important that people look at the light bulbs that they're purchasing, to try to get low temperature, looking at under 3,000 lumen, or the temperature under 3,000 K. You can look at lumens too. The Dark Sky International has a lot of really great recommendations for light bulbs that you should have, the lighting types that you would put on your home, making sure that everything's shielded, which means there's a cover and it's directing the light down at the thing that you're actually trying to illuminate. So if
Yeah.
that's the sidewalk, you're not just spilling light
Yeah.
into the night sky. So lots of things like that. Temperature,
Red timing, like
timing,
time
if
your
you can put it on a
lights.
timer, and everyone worries about safety, and that's the reason that they have on there. But there's been a lot of research showing that motion sensor lights are far more effective for security than lights on all the time. Because if you're sitting at home and it's dark, and all of a sudden that porch light goes on,
Catch it.
you know something's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what time? Like, when should people be turning their lights off and turning them on? At what
Those
light level?
crucial times are really first thing, a few hours before sunrise. So people should limit their use, I would say, in that like 2 hours before dawn for sure. So a lot of the lights out programs for like the urban areas when businesses enroll, they want to, we recommend that they turn them off at sunset, and go through the rest of the night. But they say, well, can we stay on until 11 o'clock? We want to be on the nightly news or something. That's still a thing, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And say, that's fine, whenever. But just, it's crucial that when birds are making stopover decisions, and so like if they're flying all night, it's a few hours before, and they're trying to figure out where they're going to stop over, that light is not influencing that decision. So those 2 to 3 hours prior to sunrise are probably the most crucial to make sure we have dark skies.
Okay. And then time of year. So we don't need to do this year round.
We could do it year round.
We could do it year round.
I think Matt's all for that. Yeah.
There are lots of reasons
Okay.
why dark skies are good. I mean, so insect populations as well. So they really suffer with lots of ambient and artificial light. And so that is food for birds and breeding birds. So we want to make sure that our insect populations are trying to remain healthy. We all know that insect populations are not doing well. And so that's food for a lot of larger organisms, but human health as well. So we evolved in dark skies, and for our own sort of health and psyches, like we need those dark skies as well. Here in Columbus, a lot of people have never seen the Milky Way or a night sky, and giving people those opportunities can be really crucial, and we're losing them more and more on the landscape.
I love going outside. I live in a rural county, and I live away from town, and I like to go out on a cool, clear night and see the stars. So there's a lot to be said for being able to do that, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, you can still see kind of the light from Columbus too, from where you live.
Well, we were talking before we started recording in Washington Courthouse, the city seat in Fayette County. You can see it coming into town from outside at night. You can see that glow. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the change in lighting. And like you said, a lot of those safety lights or building lights, there's no direction. It's just light everywhere, and it would be nice if a lot of it was aimed down. So I've got some things I can do just listening to Matt that I'm going to be trying to do at home.
I know, right?
Absolutely.
Like I have to go home and do some work.
I'm going to look into the windows. I mean, I live in the middle of the woods, so we don't really get bird strikes, thankfully, very often. What I normally see is cardinals fighting the window, more so than an actual strike. But there's things I can do.
What about just different backyard habitat things like feeding stations and...
Yeah, that's a great question. I generally tell people bird feeders are for us, not necessarily the birds. And so most of the time, providing high quality native vegetation is going to be much more impactful than putting a bird feeder out.
Okay.
I'm not against bird feeding because I think they really create that opportunity for people, especially children, and if you're getting into birding for the first time, to have that exposure and to have that experience. But we need to be careful about how we do that and good stewards. So cleaning feeders regularly to make sure that we're not, assisting with disease transmission. That's really important. But the most important thing is to provide lots of habitat. And some of the research recently, in fact, a researcher that used to be here at Ohio State University, she did her doctoral work out east, showed that we need 70% native biomass in a backyard for chickadees to successfully rear their young. So that's a weird kind of number. Like, can you put that, like, what does that mean to you, 70% biomass? Probably not much.
Right.
It's So I asked Desiree, can you translate that to me? Like, what does that mean for the typical yards? And I had to write this down so I got it specifically. But she said for a 1/4 acre yard, that means that you need to have 4 large trees, at least 20-inch DBH in diameter. Breast height. Tree. 7 to 8 medium-sized trees, 10 inches in diameter, and 15 to 16 small trees. So these are all and so you basically, in order for birds to really survive, like what they need, like we need a yard full of native vegetation. We need to get away from manicured lawns. If you have kids, that's one thing. If they're utilizing that space, then I'm all for it. But how many of us still have kids out there all the time playing in our yards, and we're maintaining large lawns? Like, I think we need to move away from the European.
I know there's a lot of municipalities who are their councils are looking at regulations regarding native.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of interest in like renewing HOA regulations and things like that to make sure that people can put milkweed, because milkweed is classified as a noxious weed, and it's not allowed for a lot of people in homeowners associations.
Unfortunately,
I know we do have resources on our website, but also the department's website on native habitats and plants and how to bring hummingbirds and butterflies and insects all to your garden.
Yeah, and there are some really great resources. I know Audubon has a native backyard finder, so you can type in your zip code and it will give you a list of locally native plants and flowers that you can put in there. The Forest Service has a very similar project too, so if you just Google like Plant Finder and Audubon or something, you can type that in and it'll give you a list of all the native plants and trees. And last year, Cleveland Metro Parks published something very similar. So they mapped out all the vegetation in their metro parks and then put a list of like which plants are locally native to certain areas, and can also list to like local native vendors to source some of those, because that's an issue that people often ask about.
And I know, I mean, I'm more familiar with Scioto Audubon just being in Columbus, but I imagine a lot of facilities that are very similar. Part of the structure of those facilities is different examples of what you can do outside. So I know the Audubon has the bird glass, it has different native habitats, and it just showcases different ways that you can have those species attracted to your property.
Yeah, those are great centers. They have they partner with Columbus Audubon because that's sort of a joint partnership there, and they have a native backyard challenge, plants challenge. So you can sign up for that. They'll work with you to get you information on getting local native plants for your backyard, and tell you how to go about that.
What are some, because we're getting to the end here, other resources maybe for folks who are listening to get in touch with your organization or other organizations? You've talked about
if I want to go help count the birds in the city, how do I do that?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, obcinet.org, you'll find lots of information on the things we've been talking about. So books and web series and upcoming workshops on some of the forest management stuff. We just worked with the division here on the Grassland Guide that just came out a few days ago. So we're going to be starting to promote that pretty heavily. Hopefully we'll do some workshops on that as well. All the information on our Lights Out programs are there. So if you'd like to volunteer, you can get on there, learn about each of the city programs, some of the community science efforts like the upcoming Ohio Crane Count. So next month on April 18th, we'll have our one-day crane count. We're still looking for volunteers for that. And so you can go to our website and find out information about that.
I'm sure our wonderful social media coordinator will be posting the crane counts as well.
Cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
I learned a lot. I have a lot of work to do in my yard right now.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to get some timed lights. I just have the one porch light. Oops.
That's all right.
Thank you. We'll probably have you back.
That sounds great.
Sounds like you have a lot of more things to teach us.
I can talk about birds for a long time.
That's good.
Before we officially leave, I do want to ask what your spark bird was.
Oh yeah,
that is something that we tend to bring up every once in a while. It's Jordan's favorite question.
That's a really good question. I don't know that there's one particular moment, but there are a couple for sure. I remember taking an ornithology class in college, and my professor instructed us we had to go all by ourselves and go birding. And so at that time, I didn't even know birding was a thing. Like I liked being outdoors a lot and did a lot of hiking and things, but never really birded. And I remember just watching an eastern towhee scratch, and it's really the first time that I watched a towhee for a while. And
pretty good bird.
Just to see what it's doing.
Yeah. And so that was great. And it was also in an area where a long-term grouse project had been going. So there were ruffed grouse all over the place, and that's just an incredible bird to be around. So I could keep talking. You'd have to hit stop on this for like all the birds.
What was yours? It's been a while since we've had this conversation.
We talked about different things back then, but like when it was coming to my ornithology class, it was the chipping sparrow, I believe.
That's right.
I hope if you go back and listen to that episode, that's not what I said.
No, it
wasn't.
Between that and the
all
kestrel.
the waterfowl.
Yeah, all the duck hunting and all the stuff we do.
I'm a junco fan. I just love them.
Juncos are great birds.
They're
starting to sing right now as they get ready for migration.
They're just getting ready to go. Bye.
Yep.
Good deal. Thanks for coming in, Matt.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our chat with Matt. Don't forget to subscribe to the Wild Ohio podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends, tell your family, and we hope to see you outside.